This podcast is brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. I'm your host, Molly Troupe, and today is a very special episode. Today I'm joined by Dr. Anne Brock, the master distiller, chemist, and gin champion for Bombay Sapphire. Today we're going to deep dive into the world of gin. Before we do so, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering your team needs at no cost to you. Sid Delarive from Filibuster Distillery says, from the design and engineering to installation and startup, G&D was easy to work with. We've had great customer service since commissioning our chiller, and I'd highly recommend them for any distillery system. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. Thank you for being here today. I'm so excited to get to talk to you about gin.
Well, thank you for having me, Molly. It's great to be here. And talking about gin is one of my favorite things to do. So
Likewise, I think we're going to have a lot of fun today.
Excellent.
First, I just want to get started with the classic questions of how you got started in the spirits industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those questions I do get asked quite a lot. And I didn't really have a traditional route into the role I have today. I went to university at 18 to study medicine, so I wanted to be a doctor. I'd always wanted to be a doctor, and it just didn't work out for me. And I took a different path. So I left university, which is quite a difficult thing to do when you've been working your whole life to go to medical school. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but what I did know was I didn't want to go back and do another wrong degree. So I didn't want to go back to university until I was sure that I was ready and I'd chosen the right course. And so I slipped into a profession which is always there for people who are trying to find a way, and that is bartending. So entered the hospitality world, and for about 4 years I was a bartender. That was my main source of income. And it was a crazy, wild, brilliant, terrifying 4 years. But I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about people and relationships. And I think I grew so much as a person in those 4 years that I wouldn't have done had I gone to university the first time and gone straight through and carried on with my career. I did go back to university to do chemistry. I did a PhD in organic chemistry. And it was really, I'd chosen to go back to do chemistry because I loved the subject. But I didn't really have an end goal. I didn't have a career in mind. I was sort of doing the degree to get the degree. And I hoped by the time I finished it, I'd worked out what I wanted to do. Well, that wasn't the case. But towards the end of my PhD, I spoke to a friend of mine. And I was just sort of down the pub, having a chat, saying, I don't know what to do, coming to the end of my education finally. And he was the person who said, look, you're a chemist and you're constantly behind the bar. Why don't you go and become a distiller? And so I did, because it sounded like a great opportunity or a great idea. And so I was very, very lucky. I moved to London at the end of my PhD, and it was just when the craft distilling world was starting up here in the UK. So we're starting to see small gin distilleries pop up, which meant that it was perfect timing for me to find an opportunity, which I did. I worked for a Danish guy who had a gin brand and built a distillery in southeast London in a borough called Bermondsey. It's not too far from Tower Bridge for people who don't know London that well. And I worked there for 4 years. It was really, I haven't looked back. It was the right career move for me to take. It brought two very different sides of my life together. And as I'm sure you're aware, this industry is incredibly supportive and also incredibly small. So it's a wonderful industry to be part of.
Absolutely. And I always find this curious. Organic chemistry, for people who aren't aware, haven't been through it, is usually like the make or break year in terms of getting a chemistry degree. And you not only got a degree in that, you got a PhD in it. So you must have really loved the subject.
I did. It was definitely chemistry tends to be broken into 3 parts. You've got inorganic chemistry, which is the periodic table. You've got physical chemistry, which is quantum mechanics, physics, very maths and very theoretical base, maybe some lasers in there. And then you have organic chemistry, which is, happy to say, in my opinion, the best part of chemistry. And that's, you spend a lot of time in the lab as an organic chemist, so putting reactions on and trying to create molecules and create compounds, and investigating the different techniques you can use to combine different reagents to get different outcomes. So it was something that I just really enjoyed from a practical side as well as from the theoretical side.
When I also got a degree in chemistry with an emphasis in forensics. And when I started that, my goal was to become a forensic anthropologist. And I realized somewhere along the line that was very dry.
It's not as glamorous as it sounds.
Not exactly the chemistry I applied. I did for a brief moment try the medical route too, and then I also realized very much the same thing. You don't get a lot of creative outlet, and I'm curious if that's kind of the feeling you had for yourself, where you loved the subject and you wanted to apply it in a less laboratory setting or a less clinical setting.
I loved the subject, but I was done with that period. I still think back very fondly. I still enjoy the subject, and I have friends who I did my PhD with who I enjoy talking about that sort of side of the science. But I knew that staying in academia wasn't something that I was looking to do. It's not easy. Science academia is incredibly difficult, and you have to be really committed. And I wasn't. And I wanted something where I could still have that impact of being in a lab by the day. So it wasn't that I was sat in meetings doing Excel spreadsheets about Excel spreadsheets, but I was physically doing something in a day, so I could feel like I was achieving something. But also something that I found fun, because at the end of the day, you spend so much time at work, and no matter what you do. And it's obviously, there's a very serious side to what we do in the industry, and it is very technical. But it's also incredibly fun. And I wanted to get that sort of element that I sort of touched on when I worked in the hospitality industry, but bring it into my everyday. And yeah, did the creative element to be able to look at a bottle on a shelf and say, I did that.
It's a joy to be able to experience that.
I still wish, there's still a little element of thinking, I think people who are in the medical profession are just so incredible. And, you look back at what they've done or what they got the world through over the last few years. There is that element of, I wish I could have given back in that way, but when something's not right for you, it's not right for you.
Totally. And, again, so much respect to people who can do that. But I agree with you. It's just, if your heart's not in it from the very beginning, you're not going to stay. No. But I always, people who have kind of that more formal education, and I think it's so fun how that parlays into what we're doing. I'd love to just talk about how you think your degree in chemistry or your degrees in chemistry have helped you become the distiller that you are.
I think there's a number of different elements. There's obviously the understanding of the flavor chemistry. Not, the chemistry I was doing was not related to the compounds we're working on, we're dealing with today, and the extracts and the botanicals. But there's an element of appreciation of the different conditions that might impact everything that makes gin taste like gin. So there's that element. There's the element of, I used to distill a lot in the lab because you have to in a lab. It's in the main purification processes. And so there's that, having practically done that for years and years at a time, there's an instinctiveness about dealing with a still or dealing with any piece of distilling equipment that I have. But fundamentally, I think what my PhD taught me the most was resilience, an annoying inability to give up. And I think whether you're working in a small company where you're the only distiller and it's up to you to get the product out the door, or whether you're working as I do now in a bigger team, the challenges that come with running a production site, you have to be pretty resilient. You have to just keep going. And I think that really came, I discovered or learned that side of me while doing my PhD, because anyone listening has ever done any kind of scientific research, you know that 95% of what you do doesn't work. And you just have to start again. So you have to keep getting yourself out of bed in the morning.
Science. Just plain old science. I think listeners would love to dive in a little bit. We're at such an interesting point with the industry where perseverance is very much a needed tool. So if you don't mind, diving into something where you've had to show, this sounds like an interview, something where you've had to show persistence, how have you made it through?
It's a good question. And I think one of the elements of working on a big brand is you've got this incredible support around from the rest of not only the Bombay team, but the global team across all the brands in Bacardi. But equally, when you are running a site, you've got the long-term plan of we've got to meet this demand, and you've got the short-term disasters that happen, which happen in any production site. Still springing a leak, team being sick. We've had some really, not just COVID, but we had this one time when somebody came into my room in my office and said, "We think we found an unexploded World War II bomb on site." So we had to deal with that. And so it's just that ability to deal with the short-term, I call them disasters, they're not, or crises, the short-term, immediate firefighting things you need to deal with, while still pulling yourself and your team forward to hit, yes, the production targets, the sustainability targets that we want to hit, have a vision for the site and be growing the site towards that. Because it's so easy to get distracted by the immediacy of some of the issues you face. And to have the sort of ability to deal with those, but keep moving forward is takes a lot. And I think, thinking of some of my friends who have small distilleries now and smaller brands, there's a lot of challenges out there across the industry, no matter how big you are. And to be able to get through your day to day and face those immediate challenges while still having that vision and that idea of where you want your brand to be and where you want your site to be is something that's so crucial. Otherwise, we're going to come out, and we will come out of this tricky time. We'll come out and people will sort of looking around saying, well, where do we go from here? And so it's really having that long-term vision while you're dealing with the short-termism that we're having to do at the moment.
Absolutely. And it's a fascinating, forecasting issue when the short term, the long term don't quite align the way you think. But, there's a way out of it. And it is just kind of keep pushing.
Keep pushing. Make the right decisions in the moment. Keep pushing.
Yeah.
And, I don't think I've been in the industry long enough to predict whether, when the cycle's going to be over, when it's going to be better. But, I hear positive things from people in the industry. I hear and start to see positive things as well. So hopefully we'll turn a corner and things will get easier for everyone.
We'll get there, and it'll be before we know it. As we were talking about earlier, this year, the rest of the year is just going to fly by, and somehow we're going to be in 2027 just drinking martinis and being like, oh, that old bag. I teach a gin class with Gary Spedding, Jamie Baxter, Marcel, and Cindy Jones. And one of our favorite things to do is to show a video of you giving a presentation at the Gin Guild. And you were talking about single versus multi-shot. And I would just love to dive into this subject. For one, listeners, please go watch this video. I think you can find it on YouTube. It is a fun video to watch. But let's talk about what a single versus a multi-shot is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just say that was the first time since becoming a gin distiller I gave a talk, and people don't believe me now because I do so much public speaking, but I was not somebody who liked public speaking. I hated it. But I wanted to test myself and stand up in front of Desmond Payne, Charles Maxwell, Christopher Amy, all these incredible names in the industry. And I was absolutely terrified. But I'm so glad I did it, because so many people like you have said so many years later that they've seen that talk and that it's made an impression. So I'm really, really pleased that I did. But at the time I was terrified. So yeah, the multifold Singapore. So I came into the industry and the guy I started working for had a gin brand already. It was being made by Charles Maxwell, who's like one of the most famous gin people in London. He has a family distilling company called Thames Distillers. It's used to be based not too far from where I live now, but it's now down in the Old Kent Road, not too far from where my distillery became. And they are a contract distiller, so they make gin for other people. And my boss, well before I started working for him, loved gin, wanted to make a gin, and had gone to Charles and made the gin. And Charles uses a very traditional way of making gin, which is the multifold method. And this is where you take much more of the botanical method that you use, or the botanical recipe you use. You put it into the still, you boil it up, you make your gin as normal. But because you've used so many botanicals, what you get out at the other end is a concentrate. So it's very, very heavily flavored, and you have to add some grain neutral spirit back into the concentrate before you bottle it. And this is common. This is commonly done in gins all around the world. And it's also a really incredibly efficient tool for getting more gin out of a single still. However, when I joined the company, I was obviously building a small distillery and would be taking over production from Charles and his team and bringing production in-house. And obviously I didn't want, it was a known gin, and not globally, but there were certainly, you'd find it on the back bar of a couple of bars in London, and bartenders loved it. And I didn't want someone to turn around and said, oh, as soon as you started making it yourself, it changed. So I was very cautious, and Charles' team were amazing in terms of letting me go down to the distillery and watch how they made it and really understand the technical side of things. But it was around, like I said, it was around the time that the craft distilling world was coming up, and there was this movement within the distillers that single fold or not multifold was a better way of making gin. And the flip side is single fold is you put your botanicals in the still, you make the gin, and you just add water after distilling. So the botanical oils are already at the right level in the distillate that you get. And so somebody challenged me and said, why don't you, once you take production over, make the gin single fold? And because I was so clear that I didn't want anything to change, I didn't want to change that, and I kept it the same. But it did set my brain thinking, well, what's the difference? You know, everybody says that single fold is this and multifold is this. And so I had a little lab still, and I made, I think it was a single fold, a 1 to 3 fold, and a 1 to a large number. And I did a blind tasting on the audience. And in that audience, you had people who were staunch single fold is better and staunch multifold is better. And the results were inconclusive. And I wasn't really trying to prove anything. I was trying to say to us as an industry, let's just be open-minded. Let's not pick about how we've made the gin. If the gin tastes great, that's great. And some of the best gins in the world, in fact, most of the gins that you'll have heard of in the world use this multifold method, and they're great. So, and where I sort of came from, it was one of the many challenges that small brands have is if, like we all hope, they become successful and they grow rapidly, how do you then manage scale up with sort of some of the levels of capital expenditure you need to invest in your company, the incredible amount of money you need to spend to scale up. And so I was sort of saying, look, this is a tool that we have as a distiller whereby we can future-proof our distilleries. And it's not meaning that my gin is not made with as much care or love as the gin over there. It's just a different process. And because I was coming at it from a very sort of science, I don't see the difference here, I don't see what's wrong point of view, I didn't realise that there was actually quite a lot of feeling in the distilling industry about this. And I've had some great chats, particularly over martinis, about the topic. And I still stand by the fact that you as a distiller make the right choice for you, your product, your distillery, your business, and your gin. And at the end of the day, if your gin is predominantly tasting of juniper, if it's above the legal ABV minimum limit, and it tastes great, don't change anything.
I love that because there are so many, like, this is just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of internal arguments the industry has and like how things are done, why we do things, and putting like evidence to show like, hey, like there are other ways. Like there's not a correct way. There are other ways. One of the things I think is like shrouded in mystery is still like fixatives, right? The use of fixatives and what that means, how they're actually fixatives. Do you want to talk a little bit about the lore with that as well?
This is one I still haven't got my head around a huge amount. And when you start to do any kind of research into gin, if I was doing something similar in whiskey, there are papers, there are journals, there is so much research been done into whiskey, and particularly in the Scotch whiskey industry. In gin, there really hasn't been that much. There's starting to be more now. There's some papers coming out of Harriet Watt, and I know Gary, I think there's Gary Spedding sent me one that's sat in my inbox right now that I need to read. But there wasn't really that much information out there. But obviously we're starting from botanicals. That's clear. That's sort of the main thing. And this whole idea that a fixative is one or two of these botanicals that we use. And talking to other distillers, there was a slightly different, some people said that a fixative just meant it brought all the flavours together and it married it and made it more balanced. Other people said that it stopped the sort of top notes, the volatiles, leaving over time and the gin degrading in flavour. But there wasn't really an agreement. And when I went looking through the literature, there was information about perfumes, because obviously perfumes start from very similar ingredients to gin. I actually went on an incredible perfume making course in Shoreditch in London at the beginning of the year. And it was fascinating because just so many of the flavors and the individual essences that were there were just stuff that I recognized. And it was quite hard to start thinking about it in terms of a perfume rather than a gin. But yeah, so there's information out there about perfumes, and fixatives have been studied from a perfume point of view. But interestingly, when I sort of dug a bit, orris, which is one of the main sort of fixatives that people talk about in gin, it is seen as a fixative in the perfume industry, but it's seen as a fixative because it has this compound called myristic acid, which is like a solid. Once you can distill, do like a steam distillation of orris, and then it solidifies at room temperature. And the way the perfume industry, or the paper I found about that in the perfume industry, was it would form a seal, like a physical seal on your hand that would keep the aromas from escaping. And then when you looked into it, the perfume industry talks about top, middle, and base notes as well. So they talk about the high volatiles, but the base notes are there to ground it. So I didn't really find anything that was a real clear example of why and what the fixative effect is. I did make some gins again because I had my small lab still. I think with and without orris, and we did some investigation, but it was very, very top level. And I'd love to be able to dig into that a little bit more and get some real answers, because I don't know how many gin education classes you've sat through yourself and listened, but fixatives come up a lot, and it's always assigned to angelica and orris. But there's not really an explanation of what the fixative effect is and why it happens. So that's definitely something I'd like to understand more.
That is definitely like the gin black box, like whiskey black box. It's the barrel, right? We don't completely understand that chemistry, and we can pull levers, but it's not consistently giving us the same results. It's the same with gin and using any kind of fixative. I just love that it's the lore. Like you, industry wide, I don't think people have the confidence to withhold those ingredients. Like you're just like, those, they need to be there. And that's it.
But there are great gins out there that don't have them. There've been single botanical gins, so just straight juniper. There was a series that I say it was Herno in Scandinavia did a number of years ago, and that was incredible because you got to taste the different individual gin batches, but individual juniper batches. But again, you'd need to study them over time to see whether, if the fixative is you're talking about loss of top volatiles, are they changing significantly quicker over time without the fixative in there versus the fixative being in there? And that's something that I'd love to be able to do, because obviously when I was doing it in the small distillery, I had no way of testing that apart from just leaving it sat on the shelf at the distillery for a long time and hoping something happened. But obviously there are ways that you can stress test spirits if you're doing any kind of shelf life testing, or, you put it under light, put it under heat, and you see how long it lasts. So it's certainly something I'd love to revisit.
Yes, I am curious too. I know Gary and Tony at the VDAS labs were doing decanting part of looking at this too, where they were going from bottle to bottle or an open top vessel, and seeing that, some gins really lost their volatile components. And is that just because, who knows why? And was it a sensory, there wasn't enough, and they know there wasn't enough in place to put a study together. It was just that's
the thing. And obviously, you'd want to do it with gins that are available on the market, but so there's very few gins that have exactly the same production process and botanical mix, because otherwise they'd be the same gins. So then you have to distill specific gins with that. So statistically, there's a lot that needs to be done in order for you to prove this one way or the other. But I think it was going back. I think the reason I chose that topic was, again, it was around this idea of there are things we say in the industry that we just take as given. And if you ask why, not many people know.
Yes.
Or can give you a straight answer.
The lore. One day, into it. I think that one of the most fascinating things about, where you are now is that you guys have a master botanist. And so I would love to just kind of dig into how that working relationship works, how do they kind of aid you? How do you aid them? And I honestly, the whole kind of buying process, you guys are the biggest buyers of juniper in the world, I believe.
Oh wait, I didn't know that. That's not something that I can confirm or deny. I know we buy a lot.
I feel like I've heard that somewhere. That's not very scientific of me, but yeah, you guys do buy a lot.
We do. And the master of botanicals, or master botanist, Alessandro, he obviously he sources the botanicals for Bombay, but he also works across Martini Vermouth, Molly Troupe, and Benedictine. So anything that the wider Bacardi company makes that uses naturally occurring botanicals, he sources the botanicals for them. So I know that juniper's definitely in our vermouth, so some of that juniper would be going into making those vermouth and vermouth mixers as well. So it's an incredible job that he has. It's really unique, and it's something where it comes down to this idea of a definition of master distiller. What does that master distiller do? And depending on who you talk to, everyone's got a slightly different role. And my role for Bombay Sapphire is very much running the distillery. So the production site, the making of the gin, and the master of botanicals role is that sourcing of the botanicals in for me. And he originally started his career in the Martini, so in our plant in northern Italy, which is our Martini plant. And so he first interacted with botanicals there, and then moved on and moved to our site in Geneva, where we source all the botanicals into. And so he's had, even though I think he's been the master, I think he took over as the master botanist about 3 years ago. He was training under the previous master for a number of years. And before that, he was working on a site that used a lot of botanicals. So he's, over the time, built up this incredible network of contacts and this connection to the harvesters and growers of our botanicals, which has just been amazing for him, obviously, but also amazing for us as a brand, because he's been able to get our supply chains, or all our suppliers, certified as sustainable, which is huge because that's really important for us. The way we work, how it works, I think, the easiest thing is like he looks after botanicals, I look after distilling, but where it sort of comes into the middle and collides a little bit is when we're working on new products, for example. If we're working on innovation, we're both in it together talking, and we're both giving each other ideas, and we're working together on that. In terms of the day-to-day, he obviously is my biggest supplier, and he likes to say I'm his biggest customer. So we have, and it's not a supplier-customer relationship at all, but it's any of the normal issues you might get from a supplier-customer relationship. So late deliveries, issues with quality. We obviously have a lot of those conversations, because as much as his team can do their utmost to secure the quality of the botanicals are natural. They change season to season. They change in storage. They're non-homogeneous mixes, so they might have tried a batch from over here, but there's a problem over there. And so it's just that constant narrative of what I'm seeing in the liquid, what he's seeing in the harvest, what he's hearing from the farmers that he works with, because that constant sharing of information is really, really important for us in order to be able to achieve a batch of Bombay Sapphire tasting like Bombay Sapphire, which is really what our main role is that guardianship of the liquid and making sure that Bombay Sapphire tastes perfect.
Well, I think, one of the, I don't know if it's underutilized, like quality control in terms of product drift. When you're small, like there's a little bit maybe more tolerance, but when you're at the scale that Bombay is, you are everywhere and you want a consistent product. And I think it's fascinating to think of, the agricultural products that we use, like juniper, and how much shift that they can have. And then being able to, your team does an excellent job of making sure that there really isn't noticeable drift in products. So like that relationship, I imagine, is super crucial. And then all the work that goes into making this product consistently, like that's amazing.
In some ways, it's harder to do that than to be creative, because like you say, it's not just juniper. Every single botanical that goes into the gin has a different harvest, has a different season, have a different growing period. So, some years the weather in Italy might be perfect and our juniper is spot on, but there'll be a problem in Spain and our lemon peel comes into us not where we'd want it to be. And how do we manage that? Because it's that whole interaction of all the different botanicals coming from all over the world, and dealing with different variations. So I'm incredibly lucky to have Alessandro and his team doing so much work for me on that. And then it comes down to obviously the controls we have in the distillery, the controls we have in the ability to blend different liquid batches, and then obviously the controls even down as far as the bottling plant. So we nose the liquid all day, every day, obviously, like I'm sure you do. That's what distillers do. And I've got 4 stills at Laverstoke, and they all have their own personalities, even though 2 of them are meant to be identical. They produce liquid which have slightly different characteristics in them for whatever reason, and our ability to blend those batches and get that consistent product out is really where a lot of the work goes into as well. Because if I was to not get it right, I'm sure I'd hear about it from our consumers. We've got some very loyal lovers of Bombay Sapphire, so I'm sure they'd let me know if I got it wrong.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I love this kind of, diving into like the very like minutiae and the quality control side where like, say you're doing trial distillations in a lab setting where you're trying to like say, hey, this ingredient's going to play in a known way. I had this really fun talk with a client who was working on a gin from a laboratory scale. And then they're like, okay, so this is going to scale up just at like as it is, right? And I was like, if it did, I'm very good. And also questions on me and my work. Like that's just the nature of what we're doing. Like it changes. And so like when you guys, get batches in, I'm sure you do small scale. And then do you have like another stage after that before you get to final? Like how do you guys scale that up?
So when it comes to the core Bombay Sapphire, we don't do mini distillations. The team out in Geneva do a lot of sensory. So they do sensory on maceration. They do macro checks. They put it through LCMS, so liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS, and they check the individual batches and check that they are within the tolerance level that we know that we can handle. And if there is a move towards either end of that tolerance level, that's when they start to blend batches and get that smoothness of character across the different batches. And then that comes into me at Laverstoke. Where we do small trials is obviously in innovation. And that is where we do see big variations, jumping from a 2-litre still to a 80-litre still to a 3,000-litre still. My smallest still at site at Laverstoke is 3,000 litres. So, you don't want to be playing around and making too many trials on that because that's not a small amount of gin. So that jump between the 80-litre and the 3,000 is something that we're very conscious of. What we try and do is we'll use the 80-litre still really just to give us an indication. We'll be like, right, this is how the gin is coming out. This is how we love it. This has got all the things we want, but it's not. We're not gonna spend ages perfecting it on this still. We've got it to a point where we think we've got the right botanical ratio. We're getting the characteristics out that we want. Let's go and try it on the big still. And then any tweaking, perfection, moving forwards happens on the big still and not the small still. Because the worst thing in the world that you can do is perfect it on that 80-litre still. And then you take it up to the 3,000 or even the 10,000-litre still, and it's just not the same. So we just make sure that we always optimize on the production stills.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's not a small amount of gin.
If I make a mistake, then it could be quite a costly one.
Yeah, that's fine. So let's talk about something more fun than quality control, even though I do love quality control. I'm sure you do too. But let's talk a little bit more about like innovation and let's focus on what your favorite ingredient that you're working with right now. If you can, you might not be able to talk about that very specifically, or favorite ingredient from the past. That's easier.
So I definitely have a favorite ingredient from the past because it surprised me, and the characteristic it brought to the gin was amazing. It actually wasn't on one of the Bombay gins. It was before moving to Bombay from my small craft distillery. I went out to Goa and I was working for a small company out in Goa. They make 2 gins, one called Greater Than, one called Hapusha. And Greater Than was the sort of concept there, or the idea that I was creating the liquid for, was we want a great London dry gin that's bright, it's interesting, but it's not, it's not specific to a particular terroir, or, we just want a great gin. So we made Greater Than, very classic sort of mix of botanicals. And then the second one was Hapusha. And so Hapusha is the Sanskrit name for juniper. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to use Indian botanicals. And we were using Himalayan juniper berries. And we'd got the sort of structure right. We were using dried mango. We were using a citrus. Instead of using lemon orange, we were using a citrus called Gondoraj, which is this lime. It's like a lime, but it's the most fragrant thing I've ever smelt, but there's zero taste. So it's just all on the aroma. And then we were there was something missing. There was like a gap. It wasn't a rounded gin. And I sort of said to them, well, look, we can take it one of two ways. We can go spicy or we can go floral. Talk to me about, what flowers you have around. And if you've ever been to India, marigolds are a big flower celebration. You see them in the garlands, they decorate rooms. So I said, right, let's get some marigolds and let's try marigolds in the recipe. And then the spicy route I wanted to take it down was, I said, fresh turmeric. And I don't know why I chose fresh turmeric, apart from the fact turmeric for me is just a yellow powder you buy in the supermarket. Like, getting fresh turmeric is not something I had come across at the time. And I thought it might give a spicy note. Well, when we tried the two gins, the marigold was nothing. It was just dead. It was flat. Gave nothing to the gin. The fresh turmeric was incredible. It was like this sweet floral note with an edge of like tea spice. I mean, it was just incredible. And so I was blown away by it because all my money was on the marigold, not the turmeric. So that has always stayed with me, and turmeric's always been a little bit of a fave for me in recipes since then.
So I've done a turmeric distillation on a rotovap, and it was with dried, but it stained my glassware.
Of course it did. Yes,
of course,
stains everything.
And he's looking at pre-distillation. It's macerating. I'm like, oh my God, and it did not.
I mean, it stains everything, and we were obviously like chopping and peeling the root, and like your nails are like bright yellow for days afterwards. But it was an incredible the impact it had on the gin in terms of actually it had like a marrying effect. It brought everything together and sort of gave it that cohesion that we were looking for that was missing before.
I think the underrated tool, like we're talking about fixatives and all that, and like the bridge ingredients, those ingredients that have the ability to bring everything together, they're super fun to work with. And sometimes you just really like those are, I think, the ones that surprise you the most.
And often if you're trying a gin and you sort of taste it and you're like, well, that's nice, and you can't put your finger on it, why it's a good gin, not a great gin. Often that's the missing of one of those bridge ingredients, and you don't know what it is, but when you put it in there, that would turn that good gin into a great gin.
Do you ever, I mean, I'm sure you do this, where you go into a bar, you try a new gin. Do you like take a sip and think and like, what's missing, or this is amazing, what do they do? And do you have the type of ability to be like, I know exactly what's in there, or are you sometimes surprised?
I mean, some of it's like obvious, but no, I wouldn't be able to say that if you gave me a new gin, I could guess the botanical, every single botanical in there. I think what I do love to do, so I judge competitions, and one of the reasons I do that is because I get to taste a lot of gin, a lot of gins that I probably wouldn't have tasted before, and also I know nothing about them. So I am literally judging them on my experience of flavor. So I don't know whether it's one of the distillers I know. I haven't seen the bottle. I think this summer, I was in Melbourne in end of June, beginning of July, judging the Australian Spirits Awards, or Australian International Spirits Awards. That's it. I always get the name muddled up. in Melbourne, and that was fascinating because yes, there were sort of the classic London Dry, very sort of juniper forward, citrusy, spicy gins. But obviously, one of the things that Australia has is a huge number of indigenous plants. So there were flavors in there that I'd never come across or I'd never played with. So that was fascinating because I didn't know what the botanicals were, but I could just see the impact they had on the gin. So I really enjoyed doing that.
One of the ingredients that is Australian that started making its way over here was lemon myrtle.
Oh yeah, the lemon myrtle, need to pull back on that. There's a lot of lemon myrtle over in Australia in gin.
You know, it's one I got to play with it a little bit, and it was so fascinating because it was just invasive.
It's very powerful. It's one of those ones that you have to be a little bit cautious with. There are a lot of gins in Australia, I think, using lemon myrtle, but there are other cool ingredients over there. And of course, the Four Pillars over in Australia started the wine gins, the Bloody Shiraz that they made. Obviously, started a wave, a trend of wine gins or fruit gins. So that was good to see some of those.
Yes, and I'm a huge fan of Bloody Shiraz. Speaking kind of like, you know, trends, do you see, like, if you had a magic ball in front of you right now, what do you think the future of gin, like flavor wise, trend, any of that?
So I think gin's at a really interesting time right now. The last sort of 10 years, particularly in the UK and Europe, it's been recording double-digit growth year on year. It's just been going absolutely nuts. And we had the rise of flavored or pink gins coming through. And we're starting to see that, or we are definitely seeing a little bit of rationalization, and people, they enjoyed the flavored gins. They're done, thanks. And they're heading back to more of those classic juniper-led recipes and flavors that they're used to. You know, a very classic martini gin, or those really classic flavors that wouldn't surprise anyone, which is great because that's what I think makes gin lovely. That's what I'm a big fan of, the London Dry production method and those classic gin flavor profiles. But where I am excited for gin is really, it's still only a tiny percentage of the overall white spirits market in the world. And yes, we're not growing in the markets like the UK and Spain and Europe at double digits anymore, but we are still growing globally. It's just more back to the pace we were growing before. And as we saw with the likes of Australia getting in on the act and getting super excited about gin, and Japan, as these different countries come on board and you start to see growth, so India or China or South America, you start to see, even within that sort of classic gin, juniper forward, juniper led flavors, because the supporting botanicals are so unique to a particular region of the world, you start to really open up the category while still staying in that clearly gin, London Dry gin sort of arena. And so I'm hopeful and excited that we're going to see more of that coming through. I know that China, there's quite a lot of growth in gin at the moment. Having said that, I haven't seen any data. I went to the Gin Guild Symposium this summer, and there's a guy there, Chris Pitcher, who does an incredible, you might be able to find some of his old videos online where he talks to the state of the gin industry, and he's amazing. He gives a really, really clear overview of where we are at. And I'm hoping the next time I get to hear him talk, it's still, you know, we're not back in double digit growth, but it's still healthy. It's good.
We're chugging along.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is, obviously, I mean, you're based in the States. The US still haven't sort of cottoned on to how great gin is yet. I think it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet in the same level it has in Europe.
It's been like, I feel like they've been saying that for 10 years, but it has to happen eventually, right? Like it's only a matter of time.
Of time. And again, you know, it's still such a small proportion of the white spirits markets in the US. So I'm feeling very hopeful and very positive about the future of gin. And I don't think there's another spirit in the world which a single spirit category can cater to so many different palates and so many different tastes. And I also don't think that there's another spirit in the world which lends itself to so many of the truly great classic cocktails that are out there, and also allows bartenders to really test their own creativity and push the boundaries of what they can achieve. And that's what I think makes gin great. And that's why we're not going anywhere.
I love it. And I think that is a great place to stop. For more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter featuring new stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. And if people want to, learn a little bit more about you or taste some of what you've been working on, how can they dig a little deeper?
I'm on Instagram, like everyone is these days, Dr. Anne Brock. And obviously, if you're ever in the UK, Wonderful Distillery has a visitor centre. You can come visit us. You can come and see what we do and what we make and try some cocktails with the wonderful Bombay Sapphire. So please do follow me and come visit.
Wonderful. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.